from Eastern to Western religion, you get more of an emphasis once it gets into the Torah and things like the beliefs that are more mathematical and very specific language oriented. Not that that wasn't present in Hinduism or in some of the other Eastern philosophies. They were very specific. But you notice the one thing that leaves is in the Eastern philosophies, a lot of it was about the access discipline to it, being meditation, Tai Chi, a movement of the body. Not that that goes away once you go to the East, because there's still Sufism, Gnosticism. There were beautiful things that they were getting into. But once you got over into the New World, something else was in the driver's seat. It wasn't the core practices that bring you deeper into what religion is pointing towards, which is that esoteric thing that anyone can access. It became more about how are you externally governed and governed by the fear of God, governed by the Templars, and then moving into the New World, we had the literally groups of pilgrims that were called the Indian haters, and they would literally just go around ending the lives of Native Americans, and these were church groups. And that's not to put that stain on all church groups. I also think that religion still has within it a core, a seed, almost of a code or a gene that it used to be when it was more in touch with its mysticism. But the reason why I went all the way back to your school is when you had the hard questions. This is what proves the point of what I was talking about. You had some hard philosophical questions. They didn't engage with you philosophically. They engaged with you authoritatively.
Yes.
Shut your mouth. Mm-hmm. So they're shutting down faculties rather than enlivening faculties within you. And isn't that what we did with education as well?
Yeah.
So as we get more Western into the New World, the difference is with you. One thing that I've loved about you and your work is there's a lot of people that talk about many of the categories that you talk about, but with you, the way you speak and what you talk about, you can tell what's in the driver's seat for you is how do we improve the wellness, spiritual and otherwise, of the human being. Whereas most religions that went west, they stopped caring about the wellness and the well-being of the individual and the culture, and more of an oppressive, this is how we extract resources. It became an authoritative industry.
Yeah, one of the things I'll point out too, just because you mentioned Gnosticism, I've studied a lot of Gnosticism. I've studied Jung for 25 years, and he was heavy into Gnosticism. But here's a great example of something that was like the undergrid of Christianity. It was, prior to what we would think of as Christianity, Gnosticism was still alive and right tucked up next to paganism. But the Gnostics also had this thing of an external God. I mean, God was external to them, and they also were apocalyptic. Very talking about end of days and so all of that. You see a lot of that same externalization of God in the Abrahamic religions and the apocalyptic concepts. But when you get to the Eastern philosophies, you get much different. God is within. The Vedas say
Mind.
Brahma, Atman is Brahman and Brahman is Atman, which is meaning God is your soul and your soul is God. So there's nowhere you have to drive to and no membership you need to pay. Hold still and there it is, and I think that's one of the kind of the key distinctions. The monotheistic religions push God outside and separate it from the rest of life. So it's almost as though you got to die to get to God, or you got to get somewhere to get to God. You got to go to a church or something like that. But when you really look deeply into yourself or into enough spiritual philosophy from around the world and get yourself clear on what the word God means, then you start to see how dangerous it is to put God outside of anything, period. And I think the whole world's seriously suffering because we've lost our polytheistic relationship with nature, where we see God in the soil, the stars, the moon, the earth, the plants, the trees, the waterways. That polytheistic attitude was the attitude of shaman. It was the attitude of native cultures, and it was the attitude that led to caring for the earth and seeing God in each other and having ceremonies to celebrate that. And as Terence McKenna points out in his book, The Food of the Gods, the use of plant medicines to remind us not to get too stuck in our egos and to stay close to the earth and to connect to each other. And so, now what we've got is this patriarchal God religion where God's somewhere else and the earth is just a way station. You can do what the hell you want. You're going to leave here anyhow. You're coming here to bear your children in pain and toil in the fields. And so what we got is now we've got a God that's nowhere to be found, and we've got a world that's being destroyed by scientific materialism. And the grand majority of those people are Christians. If you do the research, that's clear in the research. And so it's not that I have anything against anybody's religion. It's just that I make a living helping people through diseases and life challenges. And after 37 years of investigating this very thoroughly and having a very comprehensive system of physical, emotional, mental, and psychic evaluation, I can tell you that this is a really deep-rooted problem that's goes right to what we're dealing with today. You just look carefully at who's behind the show going on right now and how they handle people and what their beliefs about what they are and what we are. And you don't have much difference than the Roman empires or Chinese emperors ready to slaughter anybody and get rid of anybody they don't like. I mean, we're playing Hitler games right now.
It's very true. It's very true what you're saying. And like basically the externalization that I see that's happening today, I talk about on my Waking Infinity News a lot, where it's we're not taught to have intuition. We're not supported to have any kind of knowing about ourselves. We're told that the external world and sanctioned professionals in sanctioned institutions, they own the right to say the words like cure. They own certain words, and you can get in a whole world of trouble if you go against and push against it. And then you look at the massive amount of literature that comes from these specific institutions. Not a word about how to breathe. Not a word about how to move. Not a word about how to eat
or think, or breathe, or
think,
eat, or be healthy. It's illegal to be
exactly.
healthy.
They think your thoughts for you, and if you think critically, you're dangerous. And like that's what I love about your book here, how to eat, move, and be healthy. You're touching upon these core tenets of it.
Yeah.
And so for me, you're definitely right. The externalization of God that you're saying, like even in the Gnostics, was seen. And they talk about the archons and all these things that like are external to us and very powerful. Whereas you're definitely right, in the Eastern philosophies, and you would say the Eastern religions, the way their practice was developed was around facing those things within and having the right methodology to be in your center, calm your nervous system, use your breath, focus, don't shy away from what you are seeing. It's a part of reality, but it is also something that exists within you. And once you have a better methodology to not let what some of your own shadow content would be take a hold of your nervous system, then that's how you start empowering people. Take your health back into your own hand. That means your mental health as well, your spiritual health. And these core tenets are a kind of hygiene of the mind. And so we hear, scrub your hands 5 times a day. Anytime you touch anything, wear plastic gloves, put a mask on, stay away from people, stay inside closed doors where it's just reused air being recirculated. None of these things are anything but what Charles Eisenstein calls bowing at the altar of safety.
Yeah.
Making it seem like life is all about being safe. And I would love for you to riff on that part, because I know you bring people in, you guide people into their health by empowering them. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you've triggered an avalanche of possible thoughts on that one. Don't know I can juggle them all because they're popping up left, right, and center. And I just was enjoying listening to you share there. So the first thing I want to point out is that we have a combination of very significant challenges in the human being today. Not the human being in and of itself, but in the way that we've been programmed. And one of the things that's a problem is that the monotheistic religions are ethnocentric religions. So whenever you have an ethnocentric religion, you have a God with its own rules and regulations, which by definition makes it not a God. I'll point that out. By definition, God is that for which there is no other. God is that which is utterly sustained within and of itself. There is nothing behind God. A great description of the real God is given by Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching when he describes the Tao. He says it's older than old, it's deeper than deep, it's darker than dark, it's older than God. What's he saying? He's saying what God is, you can't even put a name on. If you've got an idea about what God is, then that's something that's fairly recent compared to the Tao. So any, talking about God, you have to distinguish. Are you talking about the Tao that can be spoken, or a God that's an idea? Or are you talking about that for which there is no other and there is no name or way to describe it? And the instant you begin speaking, you're already dividing the whole. And so the other problem is that we've lost our understanding of an application of spirituality. When you have ethnocentric religions, they build fences around themselves. They're closed belief systems. They war like hell with each other, and they threaten you. If you're a Muslim and you start studying Christianity and walk in with a Christian book or a Buddhist book, you're going to meet some pretty intense experiences. If you're a Christian and you show up with a book on Buddhism or Vedanta or Patanjali's, you're going to meet some pretty interesting reactions, because you're now going outside of the belief system. You're now a traitor. So there's this very defined fence, because belief systems are by definition closed and they have defense mechanisms built into them. And if you look at the science of brainwashing, you can see all the tenets right there. The Catholic Church had brainwashing mastered by the 8th century AD, and they've been perfecting it ever since. But this leads me to a bigger point. Spirituality, a simple definition of spirituality, is connecting to a greater whole. So as we grow in consciousness, we realize first, if we're smart, boy, my ego is not as reliable as I thought it was. Whenever I'm making decisions from my ego, the chances of me having relationship problems, financial problems, and about everything else is very real. So the first thing you have to come to realize is what you think of as yourself is very susceptible to programming and trickery, and you've got to figure out, how do I get beyond myself? So you take the hero's journey. What's the first thing you got to do? Well, you realize there's a crisis. Second of all, you realize if you don't do something about it, your life's going to stay the same as it always has been, which is shitty, or you wouldn't be irritated and ready to go on the hero's journey. But then you got to find a mentor. And so right there, you see the spirituality is growing, because now you're going outside of yourself to get guidance to somebody that has the skill and the wisdom to help you through whatever it is that you have to conquer on your hero's journey, which first and foremost is realizing who and what you are. So you go on the hero's journey, you meet people, you come into challenges, you're often brought to the edge of yourself. And then you have to say, okay, how, not only who else can help me, but you've got to start really learning from people. And so as you go through the hero's journey, you're meeting people that oppose you. You're learning what their beliefs are. You're learning what your commonalities are. Then you're learning that there's other masters that know other things, that give you different perspectives. And eventually, if you're lucky, one of them, like a monk, will teach you how to communicate with your higher self or your soul. And then you'll realize that there's a part of you that has wisdom that your ego was completely and utterly blind to. So now you're not only growing in your sense of self, but when you come into contact with your own soul, you learn how to be aware of other people's souls, and that plants have souls and animals have souls, and that everything is a divine expression. And you realize you can talk to these things by quieting yourself and connecting to them consciously. And so without, a long technical explanation, what I'm trying to show is that as we grow spiritually, we grow from an I-oriented perspective to a we-oriented perspective, which is me and my group, my friends, my fellow church members, whatever. But then you mature into a world-centric or an all perspective, because you come to the realization that your life can't be what it is without everybody and without the whole world. I mean, if you look at the computer you're using right now, if you could track down every person that was involved in the making that computer, where all the supplies came from, you would probably have something close to a web that covered the globe in many ways. If you look at where your car parts come from, how it got there, if you look at anything, look where your books come from, you will see that what we do in the world today is a team effort. And the bike you ride was made by somebody else. The toilet paper you wipe your butt with was made by somebody else. The food you eat was grown by somebody else. And the list just goes on and on. So you come to the realization, wow, I need everybody on this planet. And the healthier they are and the happier, the better the products are, the better relationships are, the better we care for each other, the better we care for the world. And while this process is going on, you might get a kind of question like, well, who am I really? And you could start with your body and say, well, what is my body? Well, it's organs and glands and systems, but what's that made of? Well, that's made of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And where'd that come? Plants and animals. Well, where'd that come from? The soil. Where'd the soil come from? Well, a lot of people think it came from the sun. So then you start looking even further and you say, wait a minute, all the elements that make up the earth were once in the sun, but then you say, well, where'd the sun come from? And you find out that black holes suck stars and star parts in, and galaxies and whatever they can get a hold of for millions of miles around, and that inside the sun, all those elements came from a myriad of other stars. And the next thing you go, holy shit, who I am took the entire universe to create. My body and your body takes an entire universe to create. And so now your sense of spirituality reaches to the edges of the universe. And then you say, well, what's behind the universe? Well, then you get to the Tao, or you get to the real God, or you get to pure potential in science. And you say, well, that's the source of everything. I don't care if it's a universe, a multiverse, an omniverse. And you start studying the Sumerian tablets and extraterrestrials and however wild you want to get. And what do you keep hearing? You get led right back to the Kabbalion, the ancient alchemical principles, as above, so below. The Sufis had it right. They say there is no God but God. I worship everything and everyone. Now your sphere of spiritual development embraces all that is, and you are all that is, and so is everybody else. But you look around the world and you see people that have been totally brainwashed into these very infantile levels of consciousness and taught that, God is a man, and that, priests are gods and scientists are gods and doctors are gods, and you got to be an obedient little character, and, everything you see that leads people to running and putting their life at risk for an ice cream cone or $100 now, and not even asking any questions and believing whatever's told to them in Sunday school, which is now their phone and their television screen. No critical thinking. Then you come to the realization that the entire education system we have was built by plantation owners, designed specifically to keep the slaves busy, the slaves' children busy, so that they could get more work out of the slaves, and to indoctrinate the slaves' children into following orders and having no creativity, so they didn't disrupt industrial processes, assembly lines, farm assemblies, harvest processes, And we're still using the same damn system that was designed to teach you what to think, not how to think. So here we are. That's my rant.
Make sure you all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.